Welcome back, everyone, to the Kriya Yoga Podcast. We're continuing with a theme from about two podcasts ago. I always like to have students or individuals who have interesting questions to submit those questions to me. And sometimes it's great to have them with me on the podcast to ask those questions. So today we have Pushya Mistry with us. Welcome, Pushya. It's good to see you.
Hello, Dan. Nice to be here.
Yes. Pusha, he began the Kriya Yoga apprenticeship program quite a few years ago and has been a dedicated and sincere Kriya Yoga practitioner. Um, if you don't mind, Pusha, would you tell us how you became interested in Kriya Yoga?
Mm. So my grandfather was quite interested in spirituality. So he had a lot of books at home. So he oftentimes gifted us books from Paramahansa Yogananda and so on. So he used to give it to me and my cousins, my siblings, and so on. So I think that's definitely helpful that I had that influence with me right there from the start. So, but other than that, I tried reading it a few times when I was a child, but I didn't understand any of it because the language is also quite tricky. But I think around the time when I was 16, I went through like a I think it's the dark night of a soul kind of an experience, which I think Eckhart Tolle describes about it. So something similar like that, and I and that's when I decided that maybe I should pick. I really decided to read Autobiography of a Yogi because like I tried reading it a couple of times earlier, but I couldn't really go through with it. But this time I decided, you know what, I will get it through with it. So I read the whole book. I'd also read a couple of books from Dayamata, which I think one was Only Love, and there was another one which was which I enjoyed quite. I mean, it's quite devotional and all. But yeah, I mean that was definitely the start. So reading Autobiography of a Yogi really inspired me on towards Kriya Yoga. And yeah, I mean, when I read it, I just knew that okay, this is what I want to do. This is my path. And eventually, I came across your work and got involved with the apprenticeship program.
Yeah. And I know you shared with me, the story of your grandfather and his influence in your life, spiritually speaking. And Jasmine, she mentioned one time, she said, maybe you should interview his grandfather. So maybe one of these days. But we can save that for another time. Well, that's wonderful. And Push is actually one of probably the youngest students that I've been able to work with. So it's been a real joy to watch his progress and his growth. And he always has very interesting questions. So that said, why don't we go ahead and dive into the questions that you have today, Pusha?
Yeah, sure. Let me just bring up my list. And yeah, okay. So the first question that I have for you is related to, some of the techniques and contemplative practices that you share. So, particularly with some of your YouTube videos. So, for example, I think a particular one, a few of those that I remember, one is, holding the mental breath, which you speak about. Then there's also the a technique which you share to experience breathlessness. So, for example, you say you should imagine that you are sucking the life force into it, right? So, my question to you is, how do you come up with these ideas? Is it intuition, or do you have like a specific method or way of thinking to go about with these?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, first thing, what I do want to say is that I don't teach things that I make up. uh, in 25 years, there might have been maybe one technique that I thought to myself, "Oh, that would be interesting to try," and then like I do it myself. But I don't teach things that I make up. And so, for example, in those videos where I talk about holding the mental breath or experiencing the breathless state, I describe them in a way as though they are like techniques, but really it's just when the mind becomes quiet or when you are internalized, that is the what I describe as holding the mental breath, that is the experience of it. And so for example, it's more what I'm trying to do is just to encourage people to imagine that final result of the meditation, and imagining that final result can actually help a person do it. It's like I remember when you first put this question to me, I thought about it a little bit. As a musician, um, when someone teaches you to play a scale, that's like the technique. So once you can play the scale up and down, well, then you know the technique. Well, like an end result of being able to play a scale is someone can say to you, just play a G note. And so you don't have to play the whole scale. You can just play the note, the G note. And so, for example, holding the mental breath, once you've kind of gone through the process of Kriya Pranayama or chanting through the chakras and you experience that stillness, well, that's like telling a person, just play this one note. So it's just an encouragement to play that one note or to imagine, feel that experience. And the same thing is true with experiencing the breathless state. That wasn't necessarily a specific technique. That was more of when the breathless state happened, that is an experience that kind of precedes it. And so sometimes if we can imagine that, remember that, it can lead us into it without having to go through the entire process. So it was a good question. I really appreciate it. But that's it's not really that it's more of a technique. It's more of just a putting yourself in the place of what the technique produces or results in.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. So, again, the next question, like, being very much in line with this, or maybe like more like an extension of this, how would you encourage someone else to, maybe be curious or experimental with their practice, such that, they can also have similar experiences or come up with these sort of things?
Yeah, the main thing to do in order to be experimental without kind of giving into fantasy or the reason I'm hesitant about kind of encouraging things like experimenting is because what a lot of people do is they'll be taught a technique and then they'll say, oh, this just doesn't work. And then they'll start experimenting. And really all they're doing is kind of like thinking about many different ways of doing things. And they don't actually do the thing. It's like, again, when someone tries to teach me a skill, if I can't do it the first few times and I say, oh, it doesn't work, well, it's not that it doesn't work. It's that I just haven't done it enough that I've gotten the muscle memory and the capacity to do it. But one thing we can do to keep our practice alive and engaged and to experience those things really does come down to um, a what I might call a controlled use of our imagination, because the imagination is a very important thing. As human beings, we have this deep capacity to imagine and feel things. And it's through the imagining, the possibility thinking, that opens up the space to have an experience. So, for example, like let's say someone has difficulty, maybe they're unhappy and they're surrounded by people who are unhappy and they think negative thoughts all the time. Well, if they stay in that rut, that's what's going to keep happening. But if they can take some time, even if it's just once a day, to imagine, well, what would it be like if I was happy? And really imagine it, and what would my body feel like, and what would my mind feel like? Because there's a different feeling in your body and your mind when you're happy. Then what that does is it opens up the possibility as they're going through their day to say, oh, maybe I am happy in this experience. And so some things that we can do spiritually is the same thing. The books that we read, these really inspiring texts that we read, many people find that they think, oh, that I can't know that. I can't know what the self is, or I can't experience that state of clarity and lightness. Well, if you keep thinking that way, then you're definitely not going to be able to experience it. But if you take the time to imagine, wonder, okay, well, if I was in the presence of Ramana Maharshi and I could know the self, if you can take time to imagine, what would my heart feel like? What would my mind feel like? What would my body feel like? How would my thoughts be? If you can really imagine that, that opens up the space for the possibility of it to arise. And that's why in the Yoga Sutras, there is an indication that what precedes the experience of samadhi, one of the things that precede the experience of samadhi is faith and is energy and these things. And what that's telling us is that we have to have some kind of faith in the possibility that we can experience these things. And again, we don't want to imagine it in the sense that we just tell ourselves something's happening and it's not happening, but we want to be curious about what would it be like if it was happening. And that brings in more sattva and more light into our mind and into our heart. And when there's more sattva within our mind and within our heart, then we're more receptive to the actual experience that our sattvic teachers or our guides have had. Whereas if we're just caught in the loop of doubt and oh, I can't do that, or heaviness or inertia or despair, well, that's tamas, and the mind then doesn't allow you to have access to that light. So really it's developing this kind of fine, walking this fine line between giving yourself permission to imagine the possibility of it, without going into extreme fantasy. And I've told this story before, and then we'll conclude here. You haven't experienced this yet, but you will. Sometimes when I lead retreats, we do laughter yoga, where we just laugh, and the whole point is just simply to laugh. You're doing silly things to laugh.
Okay.
And when I do that on my own, and on retreats too, but if I'm driving down the road and I'll just like put on 20 minutes of laughter yoga, and I'm just laughing and laughing as I'm driving down the road, one thing that I've noticed is that for the rest of the day, I naturally tend to laugh more. I smile more. I feel more positive about things. And that's because I spent that 20 minutes, even if I didn't feel like laughing, even if I didn't even feel good, but if I spent that 20 minutes allowing it to kind of come through, the rest of my day is permeated with it. And so the same thing is true with our meditation practices. If we can take some time to give ourselves permission to just put down any kind of heavy thoughts, or put down any distractions just for a little bit, and try to imagine what is described that these techniques result in, it actually makes it much easier for you to recognize when it does result in that. Because one thing that many people struggle with is sometimes the practices really do work, and they do, but they really do work for them, but they don't have the sensitivity to recognize, oh, I am actually more peaceful right now, or I am clear, or I can think more profoundly, and so on. So anyway, what I would say is the way to keep that alive and to really sort of empower these experiences personally really comes down to taking some time to just deeply imagine and feel what it would be like based on how things have been described to you, spiritually speaking. And that can open up all kinds of doors.
Yeah, yeah. I think Yogananda had a quote which he said, you should be a smile millionaire. Which,
Yes.
yeah, which
That's right.
it always gets to me. Like I mean, whenever I see it, I'm like, yeah, I should probably learn to do that more often.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because
He also said, be cheerful yet grave. So yes, but no, it's good. And Mr. Davis was very much about um, positive thinking and what he called possibility thinking. Mr. Davis was extremely rational. He was very grounded, so he wasn't encouraging anything ridiculous. But he would always say, if you can just imagine the possibility, oftentimes you see things that you couldn't see before, and people
yeah,
respond to you differently when you have that energy, which is a little more light and clear. And at the end of the day, spiritually speaking, what are we doing? We're looking to recognize that we are spirit, and that we are clear, and that we are awake, and that we are not bound by this world. We are not defined by the changing fluctuations of the gunas, or nature, and so on. And so if you are a smile millionaire and you're choosing to engage in smiling no matter what, well, that is a very clear way of saying, I am not bound by this world.
yeah,
So you have to ride that
yeah.
fine line. You don't want to be too silly about it, but it's very important
Uh,
to think that way.
yeah, I agree. Absolutely. Yeah. I think one of the like my thought process behind this question was, I think this is in line with what we were discussing last week as well, that there's a part of the meditation where you do the techniques and you sit in silence, and that's great. That's to a good extent that is a big step to get to also, like for a lot of people. But then, how do you go beyond that, like engaging your imagination and, learning to experience these higher states of consciousness, contemplating higher realities and so on and so forth.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to this it's very important what you bring up, and you have to be able to do that, because if you're just mechanically doing techniques, that will be good for you, related to your health, to your well-being. You will get clearer and you might have some profound experiences, but we have to remember that the techniques, that's a certain level and stage of yoga, but we do have to engage our antakarana, the inner instrument,
Yeah.
and we have to work with that too. And so that's often why yoga doesn't necessarily turn out batches of enlightened people. It's not because they're doing it wrong. It's because they're doing something mechanically, and then they're expecting that to do the inner work for them. And to really engage yoga, yes, you have to have a healthy body to the best of your ability. You have to have your pranas flowing well. But once you become internalized and strong and clear, then you have to go within and you have to learn to access and direct your mind, your chitta, to those clear realms of light. And one of the best ways of directing it is by contemplating, imagining the possibility of what it would be like, rather than waiting around for it to just, like, you know, be dumped on you like a bucket of water. Sometimes that
Yeah.
happens. But
Yeah.
in my experience, doing that is like people who keep trying to win the lottery. Do you guys have the lottery in India?
Yeah. Yeah. I think so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
here it's everyone pays like $1 for a ticket, hoping they're going to
Yeah.
win like $23 million or something, and no one ever wins. And one person out of a whole lot might, but no one
Yeah.
really ever wins. And so oftentimes we treat yoga that way, like, oh well, I hope I get it this time, rather than doing what someone might do who knows how to generate income, start a good business. Like they're more likely to have success rather than
Yeah.
just waiting around.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
God helps those who help themselves. So,
that's right. That's right. Yes.
yeah. Okay. So for my next question, I think this is a bit specific to me and something I'm definitely very curious about is, how can someone like me who lives so far away from you, manage to build a good relationship with you? What are some practical steps that can be taken, that can help in this with this?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I actually get this quite a bit. So I'm glad you asked it. Mainly, the question that I get is that there's no one around me who teaches this. What can I do? And it is nice to have someone that you can go physically visit with. When I first began practicing, my teacher Roy Davis, he lived about an 8-hour drive away. So, I mean, that's kind of a long drive. But I would go see him 2, 3, 4 times a year on retreat. And at that time, the internet really wasn't what it is now. And so after that, maybe we could do an email or two or a phone call, but we weren't doing a lot with Zoom, or there wasn't a whole lot of things like that. So I had to make the most of that when I was there. But in this day and age, uh, while physical proximity might not be easy, you can stay in touch with people. And so regular Zoom meetings, attending some of our online sessions and so on, like what that does is it allows you to get to know me a little bit better, and it allows me to get to know you a little bit better. And this is really important when it comes to the spiritual path, because a lot of people, they will watch someone's videos or they will read their books and they'll say, oh, that's my teacher, that's my guru. And guru just means teacher.
Yeah.
But that person might not have ever met them. That person's books that you have read might not have never have met them. And so it doesn't really work that way. You can
Yeah.
learn from someone, but in order to actually have that more of a transformational relationship, you have to work with them. For example, like working with a counselor. If I'm working with a counselor and she has written a really wonderful book, that can be really helpful for me.
Yeah.
But it's not the same as me actually going and having conversations where she gets to see exactly how my mind is functioning, exactly where I am, and then make recommendations and so on. So the simple thing is really just this: just staying in touch. Just sending an email. What are you up to? If there are questions that you have, asking the questions, because what I find fascinating is a lot of people don't write to me because they think I'm too busy and then they don't want to bother me. And I get it and I
Yeah.
appreciate that. but I mean, this is what I do. So if no one writes to me, if no one sends me questions, well then I'm not serving my purpose. So anyway, what it comes down to is just staying in touch and being able to have conversations like this. And it's the same not just with teacher and students. Many people that I know, that are my friends and colleagues, I don't live near them, like David McGraw in Ireland,
Yeah.
Ryan Strong in California, and so on. We see each other maybe every 2 years or so on a retreat, but we stay in touch. We have Zoom calls, we talk to each other, and that really keeps a strong, healthy bond there. So at the end of it, um, this isn't what you were asking, but for people who say there's no one around me, what I would say
Hmm.
is don't allow that to ruin your opportunity to actually learn from someone who is skillful in the practice, because you can interact with people and you can learn a lot. I mean, we've never met in person, right? Yeah,
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 we
we've never
haven't.
met in person. We will soon. Uh,
Yeah.
but we've never met in person. But you've gone through the apprenticeship program. You've done the homework there. You are a little more quiet than some students, but you stay in touch, and so that's a helpful thing. So just doing things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you for that. Next question. I feel like some of these questions are a bit. So now we had a very nice practical type of question. Now I'm going to annoy you with a very theoretical uh,
Okay.
and like yeah, extreme kind of a question. But so what is your definition of, enlightenment and liberation? So for example, there are some people who are maybe of the opinion that you just need to experience the self, say once, that's enough, and then that's it. You don't have to worry about it. While others will insist that, oh, you know what, it needs to be stabilized.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there's always the risk of falling back. So, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, I agree with the I agree with the individuals who say it has to be stabilized, because if it's just once, then it's just a fluke. And anyone can have a fluke. Kind of using the example of being a musician again. If you're not that good of a musician and maybe once you play an amazing performance but you can't do it again, to me that's just great, you did a good job. But to me, the true musician is the one who, no matter how they're feeling, no matter what's going on in their life, they get up on the stage and they're able to do it no matter what. They have that
Hmm.
capacity to be successful. But that's true with any area of life. you know
Hmm.
the professional in their field, it doesn't matter what's going on, they can still show up at a very high level. And so the same thing is true with our yoga practice. Is our real What we are aiming to do is to become so established in the realization of the self that there's no falling back from, there's no losing sight of it, there's no ability to revert to a state where you don't know it anymore, or it becomes confused, or it becomes lost. And so the idea of enlightenment, what does that mean? That's a very good question, because enlightenment itself really just means that you are enlightened about something.
Yeah,
So for example, you're very good at mathematics. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So you are enlightened about mathematics.
Yes.
Okay. And so we can be enlightened about all kinds of things. We can be enlightened about how to be compassionate. We can be enlightened about how to uh, share love with the world, and so on. That's a very important goal. But from the perspective of Kriya Yoga, as it relates to the broader uh, picture of yoga, meaning the Kriya Yoga that we teach and that we represent, that is a particular kind of path and thread but it's part of an overarching umbrella of a system that we'll call yoga. And
Yeah.
Patanjali summed that up pretty good in the Yoga Sutras. And when you follow the Yoga Sutras, he never really uses the word enlightenment. He uses the word
Yeah.
kaivalya,
Never there.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is the aloneness of seeing, being absolutely pure consciousness, the seer, without any kind of definitions from prakriti or nature, any kind of fluctuations or changes. So you can be enlightened about that. That is how yoga works. You can know, yes, there's the self and there's prakriti, there's nature, and we need to figure out these fluctuations. You can be enlightened, you can have knowledge about that. But kaivalya is the actual experience of abiding as the seer and letting go of the fluctuations and changes that are going on, within and around us. And so, there are different ways of knowing that. There's the intellectual way, but then following the path of Kriya Yoga, the meditation techniques, as well as the principles outlined in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, that is what gives you the actual experience of it. So in that case, the sense of enlightenment is the knowing of the reality of it because you've seen it. Not because someone told you about it, not because you think it's neat, but because you know it. Like, for example, right now, we've had a snowstorm, and right now everything is white. Well, if I had the blinds down and I hadn't been outside yet, and someone told me there's a whole bunch of snow out there, but I hadn't seen it, I know it. But it's not until I step out my door and I realize how cold it is and I see the snow blowing and I directly experience the bright white of the snow. That is the pure sense of enlightenment because I have experienced it myself.
Yes.
And sometimes we catch glimpses of things, spiritually speaking, but it's not the actual, it's not what you would call, it's not what I would call, I suppose, enlightenment in the sense of, some people can catch a glimpse of peace and clarity. And they can catch a glimpse that they are not the body, they are not the mind, they're not any of these things. Often this happens with people who experience near-death experiences, but it's just a glimpse. If they come back and they continue living from a small-minded place, or they can't live from the reality of what they saw, then what that means is it was a gift that they were given to catch it. But now they have to do the inner work, which is why we incarnate as humans, to not just have it happen when we're having a near-death experience, or to not just have it happen when we're around a supremely enlightened being, but such that it becomes our own recognized natural state. It's in there, but we have to recognize it ourselves. So to answer the question, I don't think we should give much time when someone says, "Oh, I've had an experience and then I'm awake." Now, if we're talking about someone like Ramana Maharshi, who had an experience and then lived from it, he didn't just have an experience, then start a YouTube channel and start telling everyone he had an enlightening experience, and then everyone starts following him, and then he looks at them glassy-eyed through YouTube, and everyone thinks he's enlightened. He didn't do that. He had an experience, and it stayed. It remained stable, and you could tell by the way he lived his life. So, and the other side of that is that is an interesting experience Ramana Maharshi had. But even in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, there's a statement that says that sometimes people are born just right on the cusp of awakening, but it's because they've done all the work previously. If we use the theory of past lifetime, so for Ramana Maharshi, it would indicate that he was kind of already there. And when he was born, he tipped over the edge a little bit and then stayed there. And that does happen to a very rare number of people. But if we want to know that, then we practice yoga, and then we will build up the accumulation of experience and knowledge like he did in previous lifetimes, until we
Mm-hmm.
might reach that one point where in the next day you wake up and there I am awake. And it's not because of just a one-off thing. It's the culmination of the momentum from your past spiritual practice, essentially.
Yeah. Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Definitely a lot to think about. I was saying that, you know what, just after we get done with it, I just send a mail to you that, hey, do you mind sharing the recording immediately
Yes,
rather
yeah,
than
that's fine. Yeah,
me
yeah.
having to wait for the podcast to come out. But yeah,
Yeah, I can do that.
yeah. Okay. Um, Moving on. So, what has been the most challenging aspect of your spiritual journey so far?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, it's hard to answer that because, on one hand, what has been the most challenging aspect for me has also been the most profound thing. So in a way, I don't look at it like it's challenging now, I suppose. Uh, and I would say uh, the most challenging thing that I experienced was the loss of my wife, Melissa, because we learned Kriya Yoga at a very young age. I was 20 and she was just a year or two older. She was a year or two older than me when she met Mr. Davis, and we were very much interested in everything yogic. We practiced Ayurveda, we became vegetarian, we exercised, we tried to live the yamas and niyamas to the best of our ability. We tried to check all the boxes and follow all of this stuff. And then, after 16 or so years, really it seemed out of nowhere, she developed a very aggressive form of cancer. And within a year and a half, she had passed. And that was a huge challenge to my faith. It was, it was, it was the hardest thing. It was the hardest thing to process, because, maybe not everyone is as naive as I am, but, you think that if you do everything right, if you make sure that you live a good life and you take care of each other and you take care of your body and you're kind and so on, and you are responsible, that God shouldn't do this to you. And so that was a very big, that really pushed against a lot of things. And even with my teacher, with Mr. Davis, you hear all these stories of people being miraculously healed, and
Mm-hmm.
if you just do this, you'll be miraculously healed, and so on. And there were numerous people that we read about that had these experiences, and she was miraculously healed in the sense that the whole illness, she was present, she was clear. I know she didn't want to pass, but
Mm-hmm.
up until the very end, she was a very clear, radiant person, which to me spoke to the result of her Kriya Yoga practice, because I don't know if she would have been able to remain there if she hadn't had 16 years of Kriya Yoga practice. And even in my own life, I don't know how I don't think I would have handled it the way I did, or been able to help her through it the way I did, if I had not had those previous 16 years of time with Mr. Davis, of time studying, of really trying to understand life, the universe, and
Yeah.
everything.
Yeah.
But that experience, while I would not wish it on anyone, and I would not really want to go through it again,
Yeah.
yeah, it taught me so much about what faith really is
Mm-hmm.
and what is really behind life, I suppose. And it taught me that we are not the body. It taught me that we are more than just the lives that we think we have. And so, while it was an extremely painful process, I really attribute a lot of that experience to an opening up to understanding many of the deeper principles of yoga that I didn't know before. I don't think I was able to grasp before. So for me, it was having an experience like that, and then consciously cultivating or realizing what real faith is.
Hmm.
But again, as I mentioned, that as I look back on it, even when Melissa was going through her experience, um, she always said, I wouldn't take back a minute.
Yeah.
No matter what she was going through, she said, I wouldn't take back a minute. And I didn't understand that at the time, because to me, I'm thinking I would take back every minute of it. We don't have to experience this, like what's going on. But as the years have gone on and I look back and I realize, she is wherever she needs to be. She had her experience. She clearly did a good job in this lifetime. Um, and when I look back to how it has affected me and my capacity to relate to my spiritual practice and even to others, I also now can say I wouldn't take back a minute either, because I was thinking about this morning when I was meditating. I suppose I shouldn't have been thinking. I should have just been awake in the bliss of samadhi. But towards the end, I had a realization, because usually they come towards the end, and that was that nothing is broken.
Mm.
There's a lot of trouble in the world, in our lives, and so on, but they're really deep down, nothing is broken.
Hmm.
Anything that is happening, anything that is existing. I was talking about this with my partner Jasmine yesterday. Anything that comes into our life is a very direct statement from the divine God, however you want to put it. It's a very direct statement of what we need right now. So, for
Yeah.
example, if a physical illness comes our way, that's not going to be very pleasant. But in a way, that is Divine Mother, God, divine consciousness saying, so you think you're your body?
Yeah.
Okay, well, here's an experience so that you get that. And if you struggle with it, if you fight it, it doesn't mean that you don't try to heal yourself. It doesn't mean that you don't try to take care of yourself. But if you remain in that kind of rough state that, why is this happening? Well, just stop and
Hmm.
say, well, it's happening because I think I'm my body.
Yeah.
And you can still take care of yourself and know you're not your body. Or if your career isn't working out, or if your relationships aren't working out, oh, so you think that you're defined by your career. Well, here's a perfect opportunity for you to recognize, no, you're not. You are
Yeah.
spirit. And this is hard,
Yeah.
because the way yoga and spirituality is commodified now, it's as though it is a balm and cure for everything. But
Yeah.
true yoga, true spirituality is for you to recognize what you are beyond everything. What is the eternal, pure, clear, serene, and free aspect of you. And that is not wetted by water. It's not burnt by fire. It can't be killed. And so, when you read the chapter 2 of the Bhagavad Gita, it's telling you exactly what the end result is. The thing we were talking about earlier about imagining things. Well, one of the best things we can do is get out the Bhagavad Gita, or, Ashtavakra Gita, maybe, if you like that book. And when you read what it says there about, you are not defined by the senses or the mind, or that you are never born, you never die. Well, if you stop and just spend some time imagining, what would it be like if I knew that and felt that really truly, then a lot of the stuff that comes your way isn't going to trouble you anymore, because you realize, just like I mentioned, nothing is broken.
Yeah.
Anything that arises, there really is something under that, which is pointing you in a direction. And that is a very beautiful experience to have, but it does require a lot of inner fortitude and strength and maturity. And that is essentially what the whole Kriya Yoga path is about, is developing that in you so that you are strong. I use a lot of examples of musicians. It's like this. Again, if you're a very good musician and something goes wrong up on stage, you don't throw a fit and, destroy your instrument and run off and cry and make the audience wonder what's going on. If something goes wrong, you know what you do? You keep smiling, you keep playing to the best of your ability until the song is over. And in
Yeah.
a way, that's what yoga is teaching us to do. It's teaching us to remain engaged, moving forward, centered as we navigate this world that sometimes we think is broken, but we realize, well, the things we think are broken are really just an opportunity for deeper contemplation, really. And when you live your life that way, well, then yoga is about everything that you do, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think recently within my apartment building, there was a death that happened. I think it was quite sudden. So I think it was the apartment right below mine. And it was in the middle of the night. And I think the old, there's a man that passed away. I think he was 70. Initially, I thought he was young. He didn't look that old, but like a couple of days later, I heard that he was like around 70 or so, and he passed away all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
So in the morning, I mean, I woke up and I was headed to work, and the cries were just so loud. I mean, it was quite um, difficult experience to have. Like, I mean, early in the morning, I was, and one of the things that came to my mind was very much that, like in terms of just the importance of the Bhagavad Gita and the yoga and things like that, because just all that suffering, and I'm not trying to like invalidate that or anything,
Yeah.
of course, but it's just when it is only when you go through times like these do you like not really understand the value of this type of work. So yeah.
Yeah. And it's important, as you mentioned, like you can still grieve and feel the
Yeah.
pain of loss and so on, but there's a difference in it when you are feeling it from, I guess, from the perspective of knowing that this is the transient, this is just how life
Yeah.
works. It doesn't change the amount of grief that you feel, or how you express it. But people can become really attached to the problem
Mm.
of the loss, and so then it defines their life. And I
Yeah.
almost had that problem too. I mean, it's very easy to define yourself by something that huge that happens in your life. But that
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
something else that I had to learn too, was that that was not a defining factor of my life. It was very important. But if I held on to it as though that was the thing that defined my life, I would not be honoring, Melissa's life. I would not be honoring what I had learned. I would not be honoring the teachings and so on. So, not to kind of spend too much time on that, but yeah, it's important to have these kinds of understanding, and still be open to allowing the natural expression of grief or pain, because it's okay. It's a part
Yeah.
of it's just a part of the process, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even when I, initially with what I mentioned that I went through that whole dark night of the soul and everything. So initially, like at time when I was going through it, or a few months or a few years after it, even I definitely, had a lot very strong urge to define myself through that, or it's just such a horrible experience that I had and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's not worth it. And yeah, you definitely have to learn to let go of that, because essentially you're just creating another identity. That's not
Exactly.
yoga. Yeah.
Yes. And that's really what yoga is helping us to let go of, is this sense of
Yeah.
transient identity, I suppose.
Yes. So yeah, the next question is very much in line with like the exact opposite of. So what was the most challenging versus what was the most rewarding experience?
Oh my. The most rewarding experience, it's not just a single experience. I think
Yeah.
it's more of a culmination.
Mm-hmm.
And oddly, well, maybe it's not so odd, but the most rewarding experiences I had were spending time with Mr. Davis,
Okay.
and observing how what I was learning was really working.
Okay.
Because I as a child, I was a very kind of pessimistic and skeptical. I was skeptical about everything, really. And even, I say this a lot, even though I'd been am an astrologer for over 20 years, I'm still skeptical of astrology. In any time that it works, I think to myself, wow, that's amazing, which makes it enjoyable because then you're always surprised. But
Mm.
so observing, having access to a teacher, to a teaching, to a tradition that wasn't, pardon my language, but wasn't blowing smoke up my ass. It wasn't that I was hoping that it worked.
Mhm.
It was that I would engage it and I would practice it and I would recognize, oh wow, this stuff really does work. And as the years have gone on, for me, it's been a consistent learning process. Meaning, while I had these discoveries early on that were very good, a few years later, I had some more discoveries that was even better. A few years later, I have some more discoveries that was even better. And so, in the 25 years that I've been at it, which is not long compared to a lot of people, but it's like
Mhm.
every couple years, I discover more. And
Mhm.
so that's really enjoyable because I think to myself, well, if I've discovered these things, I can't wait to know what
Yeah.
I'm going to discover in 3 years and 5 years and 10 years and so on. So it's a very enjoyable experience in that way. But also the other side of it that I've really appreciated is, again, leading retreats and working with students.
Okay.
And that's because, it's easy to, at least for me, and maybe for some people, to think, um, maybe I just got lucky. Maybe I just got lucky in this experience. But what I've noticed working with people from all over the world is that it's not just luck. If they apply it too, their lives also shift. Their awareness also becomes lighter and clearer. And so that is a lot of fun
Hmm.
to start talking with someone. And what's the most fun is when someone joins a program, or I meet them for the first time and they kind of think it's going to work and they're sort of interested in it, but they're not quite sure yet. And then as they get involved in the apprenticeship program, they start to see it working, but they're still a little doubtful. And all I have to say is just keep moving forward. Just keep studying what you're studying, keep practicing. And in a couple of years, I'm pretty sure you're going to experience these things. And they say, I
Hmm.
don't know. And then a couple of years go by, and sure enough, they say, oh yeah, here I am. You mentioned this might happen, and there's the realization. So it's really the whole experience of seeing how it works,
Yeah.
feeling how it works, but also observing in the lives of others that it works. so that's really uh, on a broad scale, probably the most enjoyable process of it all. It's just self
Mm.
discovery. I mean, I've always been interested in like figuring things out. And
Okay.
so, like, just seeing that you can figure this stuff out, it's really enjoyable.
Mhm. Okay. Yeah. I think a little bit of what I would tie this up with is so you're working on the workbook for future Kriya Yoga representatives.
Mm-hmm.
So, I've read some of it, and what I enjoyed most about it, or one thing that definitely came into my awareness a lot is your devotion for the lineage. Um, and based on your answer to this question as well, we can definitely see how one of the most rewarding experiences for you has technically been related to the lineage, like in both the directions. So, just
Yeah.
having that experience with Mr. Davis as well, and
Mm-hmm.
also being able to share it with students. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's also really enjoyable and rewarding because, I mean, the way we're talking about it now, it seems like, oh yeah, that's just the way it is.
Hmm.
But I do want to be very clear that it is. I have found that it is very rare to find um, support like I personally have experienced.
Okay.
Um, because being in this in this line of work and so on, I meet a lot of people and I have a lot of students who come from other teachers or from other situations. And that's one of the reasons why I spent so much time writing, and I'm still working on the guidebook for Kriya Yoga representatives, is that there is a way that it works very well.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel extremely fortunate that I have known at least two people, two teachers. Roy Eugene Davis is one of them, and another who Vilas Houston, who is a wonderful teacher of Sanskrit and the Yoga Sutras and so on. I feel so fortunate to have known them and to know them because they were so sincere. They were so focused on what actually works. They weren't, I don't ever remember having any conversation with either one of those teachers that was frivolous or kind of led me down a path that didn't work. Every single interaction I had kind of narrowed down and refocused my experience. And there are a lot of individuals out there that might mean well, but don't really know how to teach in that kind of way. And so, the lineage is extremely important. And having a relationship with a teacher like that for me has been extremely important because I don't feel that it's very common. And I feel very fortunate to have had that in my life. So that is why kind of keeping that thread alive and remain very focused on what does work and remain very focused on what is not fantasy and so on. Like that is essential for this to work. Otherwise, what happens is people get confused, they get lost, and they get off track and so on. So, personally, yes, the lineage has been extremely important. And again, not just from me to Roy, but from Roy to Yogananda and Yogananda to Sri Yukteswar and so on. Because every single one of those individuals within this lineage, whether they had special spiritual powers or not, they dedicated their whole life to teaching yoga meditation to people who could benefit from it. And it's very rare to find anyone who has dedicated their whole life to something, for the benefit of others. And to know sort of a tradition and a lineage where that is what happened. You can historically see the records of when did Mr. Davis meet Paramahansa Yogananda? What was he doing when he passed away? He was still focused on writing the Truth Journal for his organization. What did Yogananda do? He gave his whole life to it, Sri Yukteswar and so on. So, we need to. I feel it's very important to recognize the fidelity of the tradition, not turning it into some kind of dogma or not turning it into some kind of thing to be worshipped or idolized, but just the very fact of what it was, like looking at the reality of it. That's what really, I don't know, helps to empower the whole process, I think.
Yeah. It's definitely incredibly inspiring whenever you think about it. Yeah. I think. Good. Yeah. So next question that I have for you is, what is one piece of advice you would give to someone who is just starting their spiritual journey?
Ooh, one piece of advice. What would be one piece of advice? How about two? Can I do two?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. The first piece of advice would be to establish a consistent meditation practice that you engage in every day as duty, meaning you just get up and you do it. You don't overthink it. You don't make excuses, because that's going to start creating the momentum to opening up more spaciousness and light and clarity in your life. So that would be the first thing. And then the second thing I would add to that is be very open to the possibility of being positively supported on your path. So do the techniques and have the meditation practice set up daily, But along with that, really imagine that you are supported, and wherever you are spiritually or religiously, it doesn't matter how you feel the support is coming, whether it's God, divine mother, Christ, Buddha,
Hmm.
who knows, whatever it is
Hmm.
that you feel, nature itself. If you can imagine that you are supported in this path and in this process, what happens is the meditation practice becomes kind of the receptacle, the container, the vessel. And then that sense of feeling supported will allow you to recognize good sources of information, how to grow, and how to benefit the most from what you're doing. So those two things would probably be the most important advice I could give, if it's just two.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the last question I have for you today is, what is one piece of advice you would give to someone who is maybe a new Kriya Yoga meditation facilitator or, teacher?
Yeah. um, yeah, I would probably say, as a Kriya Yoga meditation facilitator or group leader or teacher, the best thing that you can do is be really firmly established in your own inner realization,
Okay.
to make your relationship with yourself or the divine the most important thing. Because when you are serving in a role of a meditation teacher or Kriya Yoga teacher, um, you are not really in charge of what happens, you know,
Hmm.
and you can only share what you yourself embody.
Okay.
So there are a lot of people out there that can teach meditation, like a technique, how to breathe or how to chant a mantra and so on. And that'll be helpful. But when you share information from something that you know deeply, that you yourself have experienced deeply, that really empowers the process. That's why they say don't learn a mantra from someone unless that person themselves
Mhm.
has the mantra city, or
Yeah,
something
mantra
like that.
city. Yeah.
And that's because they have the something that imbues the reality of the experience. And um, only teach only really teach what you know.
Hmm.
So for example, if you know that by waking up every day, when practicing alternate nostril breathing, nadi shodhana, or soham mantra, if you know that that has really stabilized your life,
Okay.
we'll share that.
Hmm.
But if you read someone's books and it's all about, prakriti is this, the self is that, and you know the words, but you've never experienced it yourself, don't teach that.
Yes.
Refer to someone who you might know does know those things, because we have a lot of people who are good at talking,
Hmm.
and this is very common in the yoga community, where someone will pick up the yoga sutras and they'll read it, and they'll talk about some general philosophy, which may or may not be correct, but they don't actually have a deep understanding of the Yoga Sutras.
Hmm.
And um, and so whatever you know works, whatever you know that you yourself have personally experienced, that's really where the emphasis needs to be. And if you haven't experienced something, but maybe you know someone else who has, refer over to them.
Hmm.
So it's really all about being very clear on what have you yourself experienced. And I don't know if you have the copy of the book, but I wrote this in maybe recently. Someone asked Paramahansa Yogananda one time, when this person could teach Kriya Yoga, or when they could
Yeah.
be a teacher. And
Hmm.
Paramahansa Yogananda said, well, what do you have to offer?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what he was asking wasn't to be cruel. He was saying, you're kind of brand new to this. Your
Hmm.
enthusiasm is great, but have you really experienced it enough to where you can share it in a meaningful way? And this is important, because when we teach, we're going to be working with a lot of different people. And some people can be extremely intelligent. And if you end up working with individuals that are very intelligent, but are very doubtful and very skeptical, and you yourself haven't experienced what you're trying to teach, then that experience can actually hurt your own practice because you haven't experienced it. You're trying to talk about it. They don't believe you in the first place. And so you can't really make progress there, you know? But when someone has experienced it themselves, they don't care what you think because they've experienced themselves. I remember, I've probably told this story before, many years ago when I moved back to West Virginia, the porch here had a hole in the wood. And I thought to myself, oh, well, I'll just fix that. And so I went to pull up the board, and then I found out that not only was that board rotten, but all these other boards were rotten too. And that's a much bigger project than I had the capacity to handle. But my dad, he's a carpenter, an engineer. He knows how to build things and fix things. Well, he came over and he didn't say a word. He just kind of watched for a little bit. And finally he started giving orders and directions because he knew what to do. And one of the people that was helping me, he started kind of arguing back. And my dad said, just get out of here. he said, just do this, you know. And my dad wasn't explaining what to do. He was just saying, just do this. And I learned, well, he knew what he was talking about. So, you know, I had one person who didn't, and I had one person who did. And when you teach from what you know, from what you yourself have personally experienced, that empowers the whole process, and that really keeps you attuned to that thread of truth, that thread of satya, which is extremely important for the perpetuation of this. And one of the other things I wrote in that book was this: it's much better for a person who maybe only has realized a handful of things. Like that person will be a much better teacher if they just focus on those handful of things that they have taught, rather than the person who's gone and studied all the Sanskrit, learned all the texts, you know, learned all the techniques and so on, but they haven't experienced it themselves. That will not be a good situation. So back to the point, and that is practice deeply so you yourself get the direct understanding and true aha moments of what is real. And then whatever that is for you, that is what you share from. And if you don't know the answer to something, or if you don't have experience with something, you just say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And let it be that. You know, I don't know everything about Kriya Yoga. I haven't read every single book that Lahiri Mahasaya has written. I haven't explored every possibility of every thing that is out there. And so when people bring it up, I just say, I don't know. But I'll tell you what I do know. And then if that's helpful, that's the most important thing. So that's what it boils down to.
I think one question you get a lot is, what's the difference between Kriya Yoga and Vipassana? You're like, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, I can imagine it, but no, I don't know, you know, and sometimes I think I should go figure it out, but you know, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Yeah. The Vipassana people, they're very, they always show up. Sometimes I think I'm going to escape them, and they'll show up to a public talk, and I'll be teaching, and then sure enough, somewhere halfway through, they raise their hand. They say, well, you know, the true way to do this is through, you know. And I've learned to say, okay, namaste. I mean, that's I'm being facetious there. I'm sure there are plenty of wise, enlightened, well-meaning people who practice that, but many times they show up at my talks and they like to let me know of my deficiencies. But that's all right. Yeah. Well, thank you for this. Thank you for spending the time today and coming up with these questions for me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was definitely great talking to you.
And in a couple of months, you will be leading an online 6-week course and maybe even doing a study group for the 12-week introduction course. Is that correct?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. Well, those of you who might be interested, you know, we have the 12-week introduction course to Kriya Yoga on Teachable. we can give you more information about that if you're not aware of that. But we have volunteers such as Pusha, who lead study groups where you go through it week by week, and then you meet once a week to meditate together and to explore the themes. So if you're interested in that, let us know, and we can put you in touch with Pusha when the time comes. So thank you again. It was wonderful to have you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Peace. Thank you for tuning into this episode of the Kriya Yoga Podcast. To learn more about Kriya Yoga meditation, you can visit us at kriyayogaonline.com, where you can find information about current book releases, online classes, and in-person retreats throughout the year. If you're interested in supporting this podcast, visit us at the Kriya Yoga Online Patreon community at patreon.com/Kriya Yoga.
Om Gam Ganapataye